2021 was supposed to be a better year than 2020, but for me and the gardening season, it has sucked. I have been gardening for many years now. I got my professional certification in permaculture a few years ago, my PDC, and last year I took advantage of the quarantine to get my Master Gardener certification through my state extension office, and I am now supposed to be an expert and able to help local people in the community with their gardening problems. And even with all of that experience and all of that education, I managed to annihilate my summer transplants, not once, not twice, but 3 times. I also screwed up my spring planting for good measure. My goal with this video is to share what mistakes I made so that you can avoid them, and also what it is that I'm doing to recover from the situation. I did an entire video on my tomato vacation disaster, and I can link that in the description below. The short version is, while I was on vacation, I inadvertently created a steam bath, and my tomato transplants shot up and set roots all along their stems. They then consequently died as soon as I took the dome off and that moisture went away. The roots went into shock and I lost those transplants. A few of them survived. I was able to transplant them into wet soil quickly, and a few of them made it. I then went to harden them off, and I have another video on this, but I accidentally sun scalded them and exposed them to too much light, and some of them did not survive that one. The few sad survivors that remained, I managed to kill a third way. I killed them with this. It seems innocuous, and it is. Normally, it was raining all morning. Thought, hey, I'll make like a double, triple concentrated dose of my fish fertilizer, and I will put it right on them, and then as it rains today, it'll work its way into the soil, and the plants will be glorious and happy. The second I put this on, it stopped raining. Without the rain to dilute that fertilizer, it caked the soil, suffocated the roots, and killed the plants. I did another round of transplants, and show those guys here. You can see they're starting to come up. There's signs of life, like I'm hopeful, but they're puny. At this point, these should be full-size plants, and I've got itty bitty stumpy transplants to work with here. I went to the gardening store and I bought transplants, and I highly recommend that you do the same. If you have a disaster with your soil and your transplants and whatever, just buy transplants at the store. There's no shame. These guys are in, they're happy, they're healthy, they're doing great, and I am very happy that I bought them. I was also able to prune off a couple of larger suckers from the tomato plants. I'm now rooting those in water, and I will hopefully get free additional tomato plants out of those that are further along than the transplants that I have in my like 4th wave of seed starting. Moving to my mistakes for the spring, mostly it's time. I regret not doing a few things sooner. First is my clover cover crop. I intellectually understood that Dutch white clover takes a long time to establish. I knew I was putting it in kind of late, but I thought I would go for it anyway. And I had in my head this vision of waving fields of glorious green clover, and the reality looks like this. It's there, it's starting to grow. It will eventually, I believe, fill in and do a good job, but for now I'm having to weed a lot because the clover really is not covering the ground. And as I had sort of feared, this top soil compost mix that I bought for the few top inches of the bed does appear to have a weed seed load that I keep having to pull periodically. I'm not mad that I did the clover, I just really wish I had thought to do it sooner and give it a chance to establish. My other timing mistake was trying too hard to follow a calendar when we were having crazy weather. This spring we had temperature fluctuations where it got warm and then cold and then warm and then cold, and the calendar days when I normally tell myself to go put things in the garden happened to fall in really cold periods, and I was regretting not doing it sooner when we had that warm spell, as I think I'd be further along now. I'm going to study more on phenology. I did put together a chart here, a little graphic, of the different things that flower and what that tells you in terms of planting. Intuitively, to me, this makes sense because plants are responding to the real world conditions of temperature and rainfall and microclimate, and that can tell you more than looking at a Gregorian calendar date in terms of when it's a good idea to plant. And if I think back to our earlier spring when I had not yet planted, we had crocus up, we had Forsythia blooming, we had all of these things happening that I saw well before I put in the spring garden. And I wish I had put some things in the ground sooner. Next year, not only am I going to try and follow this, but I think as we move into the new house, I'm going to plant a little phenology garden and use it as a visual indicator of when to do things in the yard, because I also just happen to like the flowers that most people use for this purpose. I think it'll be pretty. My last mistake in the spring garden was my slits for my seed tape. This year, instead of cutting like a 3-inch wide strip in my paper template like I have in years past, I just cut a very narrow slit. The wide slits didn't leave a lot of structural integrity in the paper, and I thought this would be easier. What I failed to think about is that I am not that precise, and my seed tape that I made was not lined up in a perfect straight row. So inevitably, as I was tucking the seed tape in, some of the seeds lined up pretty well with that opening and others were way off to the side. Good news, this weed paper works. I was not able to get things to poke up through it, but the bad news is I now have a bunch of naked spots, and I'll show you a little visual here. You can see the lettuces that were lined up well popped up and are growing very happily, but there's a whole bunch of bare spots where I should have a nice, flush, healthy row of lettuce. There you have it, all of my screw-ups in one place. Please don't judge, but do please use this as a cautionary tale, I guess. A way of not repeating the mistakes. Go ahead and learn from this. Try not to do the same thing in your own yard. I found a silver lining, which is I now have these extra transplants that I started. I'm not going to throw them away. I'm going to instead create a patio garden. I realized that all of the videos I do tend to be focused on this yard, and it's, you know, it's a pretty typical suburban yard. It's not huge, but if you're growing on a patio or a balcony, a lot of this stuff might not be that helpful, and I'd like to do something for people growing in those conditions. So I'm going to take my extra transplants, I'm going to make a very small patio garden. I'm designed a trellis that does not need to be staked into the ground, and I will do more of a tutorial on that and how I'm going to do some staggered crops and different mixes to show the maximum productivity in a small space. So stay tuned for that video. That's my silver lining on all of this, is I'm going to make good use of these extra transplants. And in general, do the same, right? If things go wrong, which is always going to happen, there's almost always an upside, and learning and being flexible and being resilient is, I think, more than half the battle when it comes to gardening. As always, I hope that's helpful. I hope it inspires you to not give up with your own garden. I'm not giving up on mine. I still have hope. 2021 will be a good gardening year. Keep an eye out for that patio garden, and otherwise, until next time, thanks for watching. Appreciate it.